Okay, everybody, we're going to make a start then. It's now, it's just a dead on 30 minutes past 7. I'd like to welcome all the members and officers to this Finance, Audit and Risk Committee. Please note the meeting is being streamed live on the Council's YouTube channel. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee member and scrutiny manager to confirm that officers joining remotely can be heard, seen and heard, and explain how the proceedings work. Will.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with our roll call. When I call your name, can you please just confirm that you can hear us and that we can hear you in the council chamber? Ian Cooper.
Yes, I can hear you. Good evening, everyone.
Just 1 second. There we go. Thank you very much. Chris Wood.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Debbie Hanson.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. The rules of debate. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on your microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. Please can I remind you that the normal procedure rules in respect of debate and times to speak will apply. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the result will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start? No, thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Will. Apologies for absence is item 1. Do we have any apologies for absence? I know we have one councillor missing at the moment. Anybody? No, we haven't received anything. What do we do in this circumstance when we've got somebody missing with no apologies?
In the absence of apologies sent to me, Councillor Weeder will be recorded as absent.
Okay, thank you. Right. The second item is the minutes from the 17th of January to the 16th of March 22. I'd like to propose that we take and read and approved as a true record of the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 17th of January and to the 16th of March 22. Are there any comments on the minutes? I have none because I wasn't here. However, I will propose that we accept these as a record. Can I have a seconder? Thank. Who was first there? Who was first? That was Claire. And can I take us to the vote then, please?
Thank you, Chair. That motion's carried.
Thank you. Notifications of other business. There are none. Chair's announcements. I'd like to welcome new members of the committee, including myself, although I spent, I think it was 3 years ago, of 3 years when I first started being a councillor with young Ian over there. So welcome to myself as well. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out in the chair's announcements on the agenda. Is there any declarations of interest at this point? No. Okay. Public participation. There is no public participation this evening. Moving swiftly on to item 6 then, audit results report 2020-21. Can I invite Debbie Hanson from Ernst & Young to present?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read, and therefore I'm sure members of the committee will be very happy that I'm not going to take you through the report page by page. In effect, what this report provides is a bridging document between the provisional audit results report we brought to the committee on the 16th of March and provides an update on those areas that we noted as not fully complete at that point. I guess just by way of background, there have been a couple of issues that have just delayed the sign off of the audit. I'll take you through those in a moment, but we are hopefully in a position that we'll get the required assurance we need in relation to one of those later this week. And therefore we're hoping to be able to actually sign off the opinion next week. So we'd like to thank officers for their continued support during the conclusion phases of the audit. What I'd like to do is just really take the members of the committee through the sort of executive summary of the report. So that starts on page 21 is our introduction, but the actual substance of the report starts on page 24, which is the executive summary. So this outlines the status of the audit, and it lists there the sort of final procedures that we need to complete to support the issue of our opinion. Most of those are just our normal completion procedures. So it's receipt of the final set of the financial statements, receipt of the signed letter of representation, completion of our subsequent events review to the date of the audit report. There is just one additional piece of information we're waiting for, which I will explain in a little bit more detail, but it's a response from the Hertford Pension Fund Actuary in relation to how they've calculated a particular figure, and I'll take you through that in a little bit more detail, but we are hoping to get that by the end of this week. Just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we will not be able to issue our audit certificate at the same time we issue our opinion, and that's purely because of the fact that the instructions have not yet been issued by the National Audit Office for the work that we're required to do on the whole of government accounts submission on their behalf. We would expect that North Hertfordshire would be below the threshold to require any audit procedures as it has been in previous years, but until those instructions are actually issued, we can't submit that confirmation and therefore can't certify the completion of all our audit responsibilities under the NAO code. So that's no reflection on the council. Every single local authority is in that same position, and as soon as that guidance has been issued, we'll be in a position to issue our certificates. As I said, that has no impact on the actual issue of the opinion on the financial statements. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention. The other thing on the next page is just sort of the areas of audit focus, which I wanted to draw to your attention. So I will take you through each of those fairly briefly, because obviously I'm aware that a number of the members of the audit committee are new to this role. So the first risk we identified is misstatements due to fraud and error. We identified that on all of our engagements. It's an auditing requirement in effect. We completed all our procedures in relation to that and reported back in March that we had no issues to report as a result of that work. We also identified the incorrect capitalisation of revenue as a risk on all of our local government audits where there's a material capital programme, and we test additions to PPE as a result of that, and also revenue expenditure that's financed from capital under statute. Again, we completed that work prior to March and didn't identify any issues. We also identify the revaluation of investment properties as a higher area of risk, just because of the judgments involved and the materiality of those figures. At the time we reported back in March, we hadn't completed that work. We have now done that. We used our internal specialist to look at a sample of those properties, and they were satisfied that those valuations were supportable. And so we had no issues to report in relation to investment properties. The next area we wanted to highlight was valuation of property, plant and equipment. So very similar to investment properties, but valued on a different basis. Again, we hadn't completed that work fully at the time we reported previously. We have now completed that and are satisfied that the council's assets are materially accurate in the financial statements. But we did want to bring one issue to your attention in relation to what we call specialised assets, where there isn't a readily available market and therefore they're valued at something called depreciated replacement cost. We're satisfied that that method is appropriate, but we did note that in our view, the values for land used by the council's valuers were lower than we expect, and we've reported there that the values used are generally around £9,500 per acre, and we would expect them to be significantly higher than that, around £150,000 to £200,000 per acre. However, we noted that the overall valuations for the land and buildings combined were within the range we would expect, and that's because of some different assumptions on the building element and the fact that the land elements were not very large. We have, however, considered the potential impact of those land values on the rest of the council's assets valued on a DIC basis, and we've estimated the maximum potential impact of that could be a £1.3 million undervaluation of the council's land. However, as we note, that will be offset by basically values being higher on the building elements than we would do using our estimates. So overall, we're satisfied that there's no material impact on the council's accounts, but we did want to bring that to your attention. We also note that the council's valuers perform their valuation before year end, which is not uncommon, but in that situation we expect some sort of update or bridging letter between that position and the 31st of March, particularly in light of the level of volatility there is in kind of property markets at the moment. The next area we want to bring to your attention is pension liability valuations and disclosures. So generally there was no issues in relation to that area. We completed our procedures and were satisfied that the liabilities are materially accurate. However, the council did make us aware that there was actually an error in the what we call the IS 19 report, which is provided by the actuary. And that was in relation to the incorrect treatment of assets related to Hertfordshire building control. Members may be aware that was basically set up a number of years ago across a number of bodies in Hertfordshire to improve the quality of the service provision and resilience of that building control service. However, from that date, the actuary assumed that all of the assets related to the transfer of staff to that service would be taken from Hertfordshire County Council, rather than taking a proportion from each of the 7 constituent councils across Hertfordshire. That error has been identified this year. The actuary has provided an estimate in terms of percentage figure of the impact on North Hertfordshire Council, and the council has calculated that to be an impact of around £454,000 for 2021 and slightly less than that for last year. With this, we're satisfied that that is not material in terms of the accounts. However, we are doing some further work using our internal actuaries from EY just to gain assurance over the percentage figure of 0.3 of total assets that the actuaries have given in relation to the impact for North Hertfordshire. Because as I'm sure you'll understand, we just need to gain assurance that that's a reasonable percentage and how they've arrived at that figure. That's a piece of work we expect to receive later this week. Once we've concluded that, assuming there are no issues, we should be in a position to conclude our audit fully. The final few areas we just wanted to highlight were going concern disclosures, where we hadn't fully completed that at the date of our last report. We have now done that. We're satisfied that the accounts are appropriate to be paid on a going concern basis. We've agreed some very small wording amendments with the council, and those are going to be put through in the final version. We also look at the NDR appeals provision as a sort of more sensitive provision that the council calculates. And again, we identified no issues in relation to the calculation of that. And finally, a specific risk that we identified for 2021 was how the council accounted for COVID-related government grants. That was because those were very significant sums that all local authorities received for the first time last year. And there was issues in terms of accounting for those in terms of whether the council is acting as a principal, as in its own right, or whether it's acting as an agent on behalf of central government and just distributing those funds. There are also potential conditions related to grant funding, which we need to check compliance with. We've completed all of those procedures and we're satisfied that there are no errors in the accounting for the COVID grants. That really leads us on to just the sort of only differences that we've got from the audit, which are noted further on in the report. And if I just find the page reference for you. So the audit difference is in section 3, which is on page 42. You'll note there's only 2 unadjusted differences, which are the differences I've just reported to you. So we have the building control issue, which is 454,000 estimates, and then the valuation of land, which again is a judgmental difference, which is estimated at 1.3 million. We therefore ask that the council provides a letter of representation along with the approved accounts to explain why those differences are not being amended for in the financial statements. We are satisfied they're not material, but we do require that representation. And there are no other differences arising from the audit we need to bring to your attention. I think overall the accounts were very well prepared with good supporting working papers. And so once again, we'd like to extend our thanks to the finance team for their support during the process. I'm very happy to take any questions or comments on the reports. I know 2 of those areas are fairly technical, so I'm happy to recap on those if that would be helpful to any of the members.
Thank you, Debbie. Just before I open to questions, I just want to welcome Councillor Weeder, who can it be noted that he's joined us. Welcome. Thank you, Debbie, for that presentation. Are there any questions for Debbie out of that extensive report from any of the members of the committee? Oh, sorry. Councillor Home. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you, Debbie, for that presentation, which yes, is quite extensive, and yes, I'm glad you didn't go too much detail, but it does highlight those 2 issues which you make reference to. Really, the question is not for you. I guess the question is for Ian Cooper. Response to those 2 points, Ian. Are you happy and content with what was raised and how they've been handled?
Yes, I am. I'm happy to cover it now, although I'll note that it is covered in the next report as well. Do you want to cover it now or wait till the next report?
Either way, it doesn't matter, but certainly, are you content and happy with the report from Ernst Young and the content thereof?
Yes, I am, yes. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
Thank you for Ernst & Young for doing the audit work for us.
Thank you, Councillor Hone. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Debbie. What we do now is we will take this report as noted and move on to item 7, unless there's any objections, and I don't think there are. So we're everybody's happy that we're not noting this report. Yeah. Okay, moving on to item 7, the Statement of Accounts 2020 to 2021. Ian Cooper is going to present. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Those of you who are part of the committee back in March will have seen most of this report before, because we had hoped that the March meeting would be approving the accounts then. As noted at that meeting, there was still work that was outstanding, and given the time that justifiably took, it sort of creeped into this civic year, and given new members of the committee and new chair of the committee, etc., we felt it was better to bring the report back to you and approve the accounts formally here, rather than rely on the delegation that was present at the last meeting. So on that basis, as the appendix to this report, you will see the unaudited statement of accounts, albeit they are fundamentally pretty much audited now, and the previous item relates to those accounts in front of you. In terms of differences to what you've seen previously, we have updated some of the content to generally refer change of tense. So when we first wrote things like the narrative report, it was all in the kind of the referring to things that were going to happen. A lot of those things have now happened, given the timing that we're now faced with. So lots of changes in relation to that, and then a few other amendments that are quite minor. In relation to the matters that has been highlighted by Ernst & Young and by Debbie, for the pensions change, this has been going on for quite some time. And when we first thought that we were going to finalise the audit quite quickly, we decided that actually, rather than reopen all that issue, given it was non-material, we wouldn't make an amendment for it. On reflection, if we'd known back then that would be taking this long, we probably would have changed it, but we are where we are. And to reopen it now for what is essentially an estimate of a big number, being the pension values in the accounts are huge and subject to significant uncertainty, we felt it was acceptable to just not change it rather than create more work for both us and for Ernst & Young. In relation to the PPE and the valuations there that Deborah referred to, similar in terms of the amount involved is quite small when compared to the total value of our assets on the balance sheet, but slightly different in respect of it relates to different views of valuers, and our value has their opinion, Ernst & Young's valuers have their opinion. On this occasion, it doesn't quite agree, but as it's non-material, we didn't adjust for it in the accounts. Obviously, if it had been a material difference, we would have had to either adjust for it or justify it, or go back to our own valuer to try and get a different view on it. So we would have done something different if that had been the case, but fundamentally it's a difference of opinion around our land values in North Herts. Our valuer has their view around valuations being quite a bit less than those based on what Ernst & Young's professionals feel. And I'm sure if we lived in over 18 days, they still probably wouldn't agree on it, but as it's not material, we're not going to adjust for it or worry about it. So that's covered in the report, and in the report we've also got our draft letter of representation, which is what the item Debbie referred to that we have provided to her. So in the report I've got some wording there which I've agreed with Debbie is acceptable, and that will form the base of that letter. Also note in the report that at the last meeting we approved the annual governance statement, and it has to be approved prior to agreeing the statement of accounts. Well, last meeting is definitely prior to now, so we've passed that criteria. So all we are waiting for now, as Debbie highlighted previously, is the final work from Ernst & Young, and I'm hoping that, as Debbie said, either next week or possibly the week after, me and the chair of the committee, subject to you agreeing, we'll get together, sign the letters and the accounts, and then that will be finalised for this year, or for 2021, so the year before this year, but that's the time we're facing at the moment. Again, thank you to the work of Ernst & Young. I appreciate that resourcing of audits is really, really difficult at the moment, and that is why we're agreeing the accounts now rather than about a year ago. But the work of the team of Ernst & Young, I think we've worked well together to get where we've got to, and able to approve the accounts. So I asked the committee to approve the accounts so we can finalise it for this year, and get on with I suppose, working on the accounts for 21-22.
Thank you, Ian. Are there any questions for Ian from the committee? Councillor Hone.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, 8.4, make reference there to the pension. I think, Ian, you said the estimated difference of 454 is not significant in the context of pension fund scheme assets of 151 million. I'm assuming that 151 million is North Herts District Council portion of the pension pot held by Herts Pension Fund. Yeah,
that is correct. Yes, it'd be very concerning if that was the total assets pension fund. As you know, it's much greater for the entire pension fund. Yes, just North Herts.
Yeah, about 5 billion. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hone. Any other questions? Okay, nobody else would like to speak at the moment. So I'd like to propose we accept the recommendations in the report to approve the annual statement of accounts. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Nolan. And can I ask Will to take us to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. That motion's carried.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8, which is our internal auditor's annual report, SIAS, update on 2022-23 audit plan. This item covers 2 reports, 2 sets of decisions, but be voted on separately. First, we will consider the SIAS annual report. I can invite Chris Wood to present. Chris.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, everybody. So a new face in front of you. I'm Chris Wood, the Head of Assurance at Herts County Council. And the reason I'm talking to you tonight is your previous client audit manager, Mark Chalkley, left us on the 31st of March. And I'm covering the role at the moment while we are busy. In fact, we just finished recruiting for a new client audit manager, but we're busy reviewing our allocations of our audit managers to our various partners. And I will continue as your client's audit manager probably for at least the next 3 to 6 months. So I'll probably be a familiar face to you. It's also my first audit committee. I'm at North Herts since 2018, and clearly the technology has shifted on since I last attended in person. So next question, I guess, for those who are new to the committee is, what are the Shared Internal Audit Service? So we're a shared service of 7 district and borough councils within Hertfordshire, and also the Herts County Council. So you're one of many partners we service, and I look forward to working with you. So, Chair, as you've kindly pointed out, there are actually 2 reports under cover of 1 here. And the one we're dealing with first is the annual assurance opinion and the audit report, the annual audit report. So if for new members you're wondering what that is at the start of every audit year, the audit committee approves a plan of work, internal audit, deliver the audits and consultancy projects within that plan. And each of those individual projects will generally have an assurance opinion. And at the end of that year, we produce an overall opinion on your financial systems and non-financial systems. And so if I'm on a single screen, so apologize while I just move across to my report. But if you scroll down in the report to 2.14, which is on page 9 of the supplement I'm looking at, you'll see that we've given a reasonable overall assurance on your financial systems and reasonable overall assurance on your non-financial systems. So to put that in context, there's an appendix that details what these different assurance opinions are, and you'll see that a reasonable opinion is actually in the positive range, and using layman's language is a sound overall outcome. I don't wish to dwell on the detail of this report because the work underpinning those assurance opinions has actually been reported to you across the year as part of your progress updates that we bring to you every quarter. There are a couple of things though that I do need to bring to your attention. This is somewhat obligatory as it's required by the public sector internal audit standards. One of the things I have to mention to you, and it's covered from page 6 of the supplement I'm reviewing from the Council's website. So as part of our quality assurance and improvement program, I have to do an annual self-assessment against the public sector internal audit standards. And this year I've assessed that we generally conform with the standards. Doesn't sound like much, but that is the highest form of conformance, conformance being the language of the standards for compliance. Part of my opinion, as I've documented further down, is actually based on the EQA outcomes. So what is an EQA? An external quality assessment is required every 5 years by the public sector internal audit standards. And that is an external assessment that backs up my annual self-assessment. So this year, after we attended to the actions in our EQA assessment, the EQA assessors considered that we were generally conformed, and as we reported that to you in December 2021, and not much has changed, that's actually helped to underpin my assessment this year that we continue to generally conform. One of the things I also have to do for you is at 2.13 of the report, page 8. So I confirm to you that there are no matters during 21-22 that threaten SIAS's independence at North Harts, and also that we're not subject to any inappropriate scope or resource limitations. And as you'll note, one of the actions which the chair, I believe, will lead us through is a similar management confirmation, which we'll come to shortly. I'm not going to dwell on the overview of work as already mentioned. I will just point out the 3 high priority recommendations which will be reported to you during your progress reports across the year, but members have recently been issued with that report, so should be aware of them. In terms of our performance on page 13, you'll notice we narrowly missed our targets on planned days and planned projects at 91% and 92% respectively. In terms of those, it may sound odd, but I'm actually quite pleased with the outcomes. You'll note elsewhere in this report that the SIAS team underwent a organizational change during the late summer and autumn of last year, which particularly impacted on a large number of staff at auditor and senior auditor level. And in spite of that, we've delivered quite good outcomes, I think, across the partnership. It impacted on both delivery and morale for a short period, but the outcomes are still good. The work carried forward, as you'll actually see subsequently in the progress update, has either been completed or is nearly completed. The last thing I wanted to deal with in this report, and this is something the Audit Committee are required to approve in terms of the public sector internal audit standards, and that's SIAS's Audit Charter for 22-23. This is laid out for you at appendix, what have I got here, appendix D. And the bit I particularly want to draw to your attention in asking you to approve it, I do need to amend a small section of it, and that section, if I might take you there, relates to the Chief Audit Executive. This is on page 30 of the report using the pack numbers, 28 on our report numbers. It's in the glossary of terms at the back of the Audit Charter, and it talks about the Chief Audit Executive, and there's a paragraph in there that says, for the purposes of the SIAS Audit Charter, the CAE, as referred to in the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, shall be North Harts' Client Audit Manager. I personally, for now, would recommend that we change that to the CAE, as referred to in the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, shall be the Head of Assurance, who has overall responsibility for the Shared Internal Audit Service. and that will cover me acting as your Chief Audit Executive and as your Client Audit Manager. But I think that will just improve the accuracy there. At this point, I'll take any questions. And if we could also carry through some of the other confirmations required from your Section 151 officer.
Thank you, Chris. And the alteration that you wanted to the paragraph that you wanted to change, I was going to refer back to Ian to ask whether he's happy with that, and also to ask Ian if he's got any comments as well, as you were just indicating.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm completely happy with the change. That paragraph, myself and Chris have consulted on it, so yeah, happy with that. In response to the question around have I placed any undue limitations on the role of SIAS, the answer is definitely no. I really value the work of SIAS and of internal audit as a principle, and therefore encourage and promote that SIAS look everywhere and anywhere they see fit, and that we encourage them to do that on the basis it improves our internal control within the organisation.
Thank you, Ian. Do we have any questions for Chris from the committee? No. Chris, thank you very much for your presentation on that part. What I'd like to do is take us to a recommendation, the recommendations, which via the vote. So the recommendations are that we should note the annual assurance statement and annual audit report. Note the results of the self-assessment required by the public sector internal audit standards and quality assurance and improvement programme. Approve the SIAS audit charter for 2022 to 23. Seek management assurance that the scope and the resources of the internal audit are not subject to inappropriate limitations in 2021-22. I'd like to propose that. Could I have a seconder, please? Yeah, Councillor Weeder. And then can I ask Will to take us to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. That motion is carried.
Thank you. Now, can I ask Ian Cooper to offer the position of the management on the scope and resources available to internal audit? I think in a lot of respects you just have, but if there's anything else you want to add, Ian, please do.
No, I think I covered that. Yep, I can confirm that's not the case. We have not limited any scope or resources to internal audit. Thank you.
We'll now turn to the second part of the item, the update on the 2022-23 audit plan. Chris, if I can ask you to present again, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So what we have this time, instead of looking back on 21-22, which was the previous item we've discussed, we now look forward to 22-23, and this is our first progress of the year against the 22-23 internal audit plan. The year is young, as you will have seen in the profile for this report, and so that basically explains the seeming lack of progress. A lot of work is being geared up in the background. There are quite a few projects currently underway, and quite a few scheduled to start in July. So based on the profile of work so far, although it appears like not much has happened, we're actually roughly on target with where we think we should be. The key thing that I actually need from this report, and I'll quickly skip across to it and won't be able to see you for a moment. The key thing I need from this is for the audit committee to approve 2 more medium priority audits. So that's for us to conduct in Q3. So before I explain what's needed, if members are looking for what that pool of audits is, Appendix B on page 42 contains an area of light blue highlighting, and along, if members are there, there are 4 audits not highlighted. So back in March, admittedly I wasn't at this committee, but the committee approved the compliance contract audit, the handling difficult customers policy, the leisure services audit and the revenues, discounts and exemptions audit. And that allowed us to allocate resource to those 4 medium priority audits. We undertake to deliver a minimum of 8 of these medium priority audits. We undertake all high priority ones, all IT audits, and all the consultancy pieces in the plan. What I need from the committee, though, is from the pool that's highlighted in light blue, is a steer or approval to take forward 2 more audits for Q3, which will allow us to allocate resource to them and get them moving during the appropriate quarter. I know it seems a long way to Q3 when we haven't started Q2 yet, but there's a lead-in time to these audits, and we also need to make sure the resource is there to conduct them. So I pass back to you, Chair, and is there any questions on the rest of the report? That's the main thing I need to achieve from this report. So can I take a steer, mindful that you may wish to talk to officers as well?
Sure.
Probably meaning Ian, I suspect, you being the only other officer here.
We certainly will be calling for Ian to comment. But first, is there any questions for Chris on this particular part of the agenda? Councillor Home.
I'm not sure I understand what Chris is asking us to do here. I'm looking at the medium risks. I think I'm looking at medium risks as well. A minimum of 8 medium priorities, and the blue ones, which start safeguarding, annual governance statement, community lottery, and green space strategy. Am I looking at the right place?
Chris, can I ask you to comment?
Okay, let me just come off mute. So yes, Councillor Hearn, you are looking in the right place. So all those in light blue, starting with where you mentioned safeguarding an annual governance statement, all the way around, finishing with the museum and operations, parking strategy, etc. All of those are actually unallocated in the plan. When your previous audit manager presented this to you, a larger pot of what were deemed to be medium priority audits was proposed to the committee, from which a minimum of 8 would be selected for us to conduct on behalf of the authority. And as the audit committee owns the audit plan on behalf of the authority and approves it, I need to come to you to seek your endorsement of or approval to amend that plan. And the amendments at the moment are actually the addition of 2 further audits from that pot that's highlighted in light blue. I acknowledge that members may not have a feel for that, and hence a steer from your section 151 officer may also be useful.
So if I'm right there, Chairman, then we've got 13 down there, and we're being asked to pick 2 that we deem to be higher priority over the other 11.
I read it. There's an additional 2 that were audits that were.
Is that right? 2 from that 13.
Yes, Councillor Hone and Chair.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Hone?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So one of the recommendations in the report is to approve the medium priority audit reports for Q3 2022-23. Can I ask Ian Cooper to advise if there are any management suggestions adopting?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we discussed this as leadership team, and as part of that, we considered areas where there've been change or more significant areas of where we think there might be areas to look at in terms of governance and control. And also as part of that, we considered both available resources to support the audit and the timing of those resources might be available. So as part of that discussion, we came up with a list of 5 audits. At this point, we've been asked to approve 2 for Q3, but we thought it was prudent to look at Q3 and Q4 together to at least sort of give you some context about ones that, whilst we're on the list now, we're thinking of as adding to the list the next time you're asked to consider this at the end of the year. So ones we'd like to propose to put forward are project management. That is on the basis that over the summer, we are looking at our approach to project management hasn't been looked at for quite a long time, and therefore following up from doing that review would be helpful to have a review from SIAS about the controls that we're introducing there, particularly as I can see that we'll try and make it a bit more light touch, particularly for smaller projects the council's engaged in. The next one that we'd like to propose for Q3 is temporary accommodation. I'm sure you as a committee will be aware that temporary accommodation is always a big issue for all district councils and supporting those residents that need it, and therefore hasn't been looked at for a while, and therefore I think that would also benefit from SIAS's view on that area as well. So as I said, I'll give you some context about what we're proposing for Q4 as well. So we'd like to look at safeguarding. That is on the basis that it's always an important issue, safeguarding, on the basis that if something goes wrong, it can be real impact on residents around the district. And so therefore, we'd love to look at that again with SIAS, just to make sure that the processes we've put in place are sufficient, on the basis that I guess you can never make complete reliable, you can never capture everything, but you can always do your best to sort of put something in place that makes sense. Parking strategy we'd like to look at. That's been reviewed this year, and therefore SIAS's view on that would be really helpful. And then lastly, because we're going to try and squeeze 5 into the available days, community lottery, and that's on the basis of a new thing we've introduced earlier this year, and therefore a SIAS review of how that's going would again I think be beneficial. So whilst maybe asked to approve 2 now, as in I'm asking you to approve project management and temporary accommodation, but you as committee are in control of this, so you have your own views. Those are the 5 that leadership team feel would benefit most from review by SIAS over the rest of the year, albeit we can come back to those last 3 at a later date.
Thank you. And any questions for Ian or comments from the committee? Councillor Hone.
Yeah, sorry, it's me again. So the other 3, safeguarding, parking strategy and community lottery, do we think we'll get round to those this year? I know you said the top 2 are project management and temporary accommodation, which I can understand. Do you think we'll get round to doing the safeguarding, parking strategy and community lottery before we decide those other 2 are the priority?
Yeah, so I'm expecting we'll come back in probably September to agree Q4, i.e. the period from January to March, which is taking place then. So yes, I'd expect to be able to do at least 2 of those 3. I'm hoping that we can stretch the audit days to do 3 of them. As ever, the time allocated to an audit is always an estimate at the start based on what we see the scope to be. But SIAS do a good job of trying to get us an effective result in the minimum amount of audit time, and so therefore I'm hopeful we'll be able to get all those 5 completed by the end of March 2023.
I can imagine the parking strategy and community lottery would be, from a financial perspective, something which is important to us. So thank you.
Thank you both. Okay. We're going to be going to look at a vote in a second. I thought I'd read out the recommendations. Note that the SIAS report, progress report for the period of 20th of May 2022. I want to note that. Note the plan amendments to the 2022-23 annual audit plan, and approve the medium priority audit projects for Q3 2022-23. So that's what we're voting on. I propose it. If I can have a seconder, please. Claire's the seconder.
Chair.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just for the purpose of the minutes, if as part of that vote, can you confirm you're happy with the proposal around it being project management and temporary accommodation for the Q3 audits, please?
Oh yes,
this
yes.
Is just formally recorded. I think you are in agreement, but I don't want to prejudge that.
Yeah, thank you for pointing it out. Yes, yeah. Can we add that we're happy with the extra audits, those audits? I mean. So I proposed it. It's been seconded by Claire. Can I ask all to take us to the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. That motion's carried.
Thank you, Will. That takes us on to item 9, the annual report on risk management and risk management update. Can I call upon Ian again to present, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee will now note that for the rest of the meeting, you have me presenting lots of reports, and I'm afraid that's often the case with these committees. You get all the guest speakers up first, and you get me for a number of items at the end. The first one we've got here is a risk management update. This is primarily got two parts to it. The first part of it is the annual report on risk management, which is attached as an appendix, and you are asked as a committee to approve that for referring on to Cabinet and then full council. The purpose of this report is overall to show to full council that we do take risk seriously at North Herts, and we do put measures in place to look at it, and therefore the document summarises our approach to risk management throughout the year. It has been discussed by the risk management group, and for those new to the committee, the risk management group is a group of officers and also includes representations from SIAS and our insurance manager and health and safety and key service managers in relation to risk, and myself as officer risk champion, but it also includes members as well. So Councillor Albert as officer risk champion has a standing invite and attends almost all the meetings of it. There is also a standing invite both to the chair of this committee and also the chair of Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and also whilst I don't want you all to come at once, but for all members of Overview and Scrutiny and to this committee to come along, just see what happens and to take part in discussion. And the purpose of that group is to give us a bit more chance for an in-depth review of risk in a kind of a space where we can sort of spend more time looking at it and allow everyone to ask those questions that just sort of jump to mind that you might not ask from an open committee. So in future, I will send an email around before each risk management group meeting and let you know it's happening and give you a chance to come along. They are currently held remotely, but they are held during the day. So I appreciate for some of you that might be quite difficult, but that is the way that group operates. So having covered that, they have reviewed this annual report and looked in detail at it, and therefore I'm asking you to refer that on to Cabinet, then to refer to full council. The next point to make, and the second bit of this report, is looking at risks now. And the proposal is that we add a new corporate risk recommendation to Cabinet, who have to make a formal decision on this, about a new risk in relation to council resourcing. Now, as set out in the report, in the sort of table on page 168 and 169, this is to reflect that there are various things going on, including the situation in Ukraine, and the knock-on impacts both from that and other factors in terms of the cost of living crisis, which is placing pressure on the council, and that pressure is in the form of staff resource. We're supporting things like the accommodation checks for Ukrainian refugees, but also administering payments such as the energy rebate payments, but also, as well as those work pressures, also the financial pressures placing on the authority as well. So we have to bear in mind that the level of inflation we're currently facing, which started off in terms of fuel inflation and then energy inflation, and is now seeping into just general inflation, will affect the authority's finances going forward. So asking you that as a result of all that, it will, in all likelihood, create a risk that we won't be able to achieve all of the council plan on the basis of those resources, both in terms of financial and people resources, are being used elsewhere. And therefore, I think it's right we highlight that as a corporate risk. So I'm asking you as a committee to approve that change. Those of you who are members of the committee at the back end of last year will have seen that we're proposing a change to the way we manage risk in the authority, and that we're looking to better align it to the council plan and the council projects. So this is the last risk report that you as a committee will see in this format. What will happen from now onwards is that the Q1 reports will go to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and they will take that overall view of how risk, performance indicators, and projects all interact together. So, and you as a committee will have an oversight of risk. So at the end of the half-year point of the year, there'll be a separate report that comes to you to sort of show you how risk is being managed within the council. So just thought I'd highlight that at this stage, just to make it clear that from now on, you won't see reports in this format. So going back to recommendations, I would ask you to approve the annual report to go to Cabinet and onwards, and recommend to Cabinet that the council resourcing risk is introduced as a corporate risk. Happy to take any questions or comments from the committee.
Thank you, Ian. Do we have any questions from the committee for Ian on this particular subject? Councillor Nolan.
Yeah, so this is to Ian. I note here in the new risk that you're raising, you're pointing towards additional staffing resource. I guess that's through the extra funding that you pointed out here. Given the reduction in the risk you're looking to get, do you think that funding will potentially reduce the risk to that extent? Is it, given that other councils I suspect will be looking for it as well, do you see it as a high likelihood that that extra funding can be secured?
Yes, I expect that in most cases there will be some extra funding. That's under the new burdens doctrine from central government. If they make us do new work, they generally provide funding for it. What I can't guarantee at this stage is that that funding will necessarily equal our costs. Sometimes we get more money than we need because we can redeploy existing resource and don't need to use that money directly to recruit new staff, but sometimes we lose out of it because it's a formula. It just gets chucked out of the door by central government and we get what we get. The other bit of that, I guess, is that with funding doesn't necessarily mean you can get the people you need. It can sometimes be very difficult to get staff of the right type. So thinking about the accommodation checks, that's been managed with the environmental health team. It's difficult to get environmental health officers, so it's been really good. We've managed to resource it within what was already available and around, albeit had to drop other work to achieve that. If that requires additional staff, even if we got more money for it, I'm not sure we'll be able to get them. So I think even with additional funding doesn't take away the risk completely. It just helps to mitigate it.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question, Councillor Nolan? Yeah, great. Okay, I'll just remind you the recommendations that Ian has already expressed, but we'll be voting on. The committee recommends to the Cabinet introduction of a new corporate risk relating to council resourcing. And secondly, the committee notes and refers the annual report on risk management to Cabinet and the full council. And I'll give somebody else a chance to propose. Would somebody else, Councillor Hone is proposing, can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Wheeler is the seconder. Can I ask, Will, can you take us to the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. That motion is also carried.
Fantastic, thank you. Moving on to item 10 then, the revenue budget outturn 2021-22. I'd like to draw members' attention to the supplementary agenda document published for this item with the most up-to-date report. And also ask Ian yet again to give us a presentation on this.
Thank you, Chair. So just to distinguish in this and the following report, this is for the revenue budget. Revenue is the day-to-day running expense of the council, and therefore relates to things like our contracts for service delivery, paying our staff and those kind of costs, as distinct from capital, which is buying those things that have a life of more than 1 year, sort of buildings, plant equipment and that kind of stuff. So this is the revenue side of it. It's a combination of both the position in the last quarter, what's changed since we last reported to this committee and to Cabinet, but as it's the end of year, as it's the period up to the end of March, it also provides a summary of what's happened during the whole year as well. So as the Chair pointed out, I will refer you to the Addendum Report. This introduced one additional variance we found late in the day. So that's in the report, and I will highlight as I go through the report. So in terms of the story, Table 1 and Table 2 show the budget at the start of the year, and then flying through all the reports you and Cabinet and Council have seen during the year to get to the current working budget. So each time we report to yourselves and Cabinet, we change the working budget with any approval of any changes that have been agreed, and therefore not reporting the same thing over and over again, which is reporting new things to you. So in terms of the last quarter, Table 4, which is on page 5 of this item's report, in terms of the addendum, details all the variances that are significant in the last quarter, and you'll see there's quite a few of them, and quite a few of them are underspends. And I will point out the one thing that has changed between the first version you saw and the addendum report was in relation to the welcome back funding. This is funding from it used EU money in response to COVID to encourage people back to high streets. And because it was EU funding, it comes with some extra strings attached in terms of when you have to pay out. And unfortunately, I'm afraid to say that we didn't pay out the money in time. Under usual government rules, as long as you've incurred the expenditure in time, you're okay. But under EU, you actually have to physically make the payments by the cut-off date. We did not do that, I'm afraid. We've learned the lesson from that, and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again, albeit that most things that EU funded are now slowly disappearing. So that's going to change from the first version, and you'll note at the end of that table that the overall variance or underspend addition reported in that quarter is £592,000. Of that, at the bottom, you'll see there's also a request to carry forward £172,000 of that money. So some of that expenditure that created underspend will be incurred in following years. So continuing through the report and picking out some of the key bits, and we'll go through it in excessive detail. If I can take you to the section that starts, just finding the right paragraph number, from about 8.15 onwards. In that, we have the impact of COVID-19. And you'll see there's two elements to that. The main element being the additional support to Stevenage Leisure Limited, and that is summarised in paragraph 8.16. There was far lower level support required than what was originally budgeted for, and with total impact of that was £765,000 rather than £2 million. The other bit of that story is in table 6, and that summarises all the other variances and overspends that have been due to the impact of COVID-19 during 21-22. Next thing to point out to you is table 7, and this is the overall general fund impact. The general fund is the council's main reserves, and as your chief finance officer, I have to keep an eye on that at those levels. And each year, as part of setting the budget and also in terms of monitoring the budget, I have to advise you on an appropriate level for those reserves. If they would go to a level that's too low, then that's red flags and has serious consequences. At the moment, we are significantly above that minimum level. And I would say that given the uncertainty that's facing the council at the moment, that's a really good thing. As you'll be aware, inflation is really high. I would also tell you that in the next year or 2 years or possibly 3 years, there'll be a new funding formula for local government, which could lead to a reduction in funding for us in particular, as well as other districts. And therefore, having high reserves gives us a chance to react to those potential changes, but do it in a considered and mindful way rather than being forced to overreact to any potential changes. So during the year, the level of general fund reserves has gone up, which you might think is somewhat of a surprise. But if you look at the table in detail and look at the lines in relation to these contributions from reserves, that reflects that we have brought a lot of our other reserves, which is money that's usually set aside for a particular purpose, back into the general fund to support that general fund amount. So while it sounds like good news, if you look at the numbers of net expenditure, which is the second row down of outturn at almost 16.9 million, and compare that to the funding line immediately below at 15.1 million, that's still a big gap between our expenditure during the year and our funding. And that's not sustainable. Most of that is the one-off impact of COVID-19, albeit that some of those impacts are continuing and haven't fully recovered yet. Main ones being in relation to the support to SLL, that's ongoing, and also things like our parking income have not recovered yet and are still lower than they were pre-pandemic. So whilst it's positive the general fund budget has gone up, there's more to the story than meets the eye, and we are definitely not out of the woods yet, and there are still financial concerns that over the next few months and few years we'll have to consider. But there will be subject to a few further reports to this committee. If I take you on then to table 9, which is the earmark reserves table, this is the moves in and out of our specific reserves, and they're all listed there. and that will be subject to approval by full council in line with the Constitution. In terms of this report, it is presented to you as a committee for you to provide your expert detailed insights on the report, to provide any comments or feedback to Cabinet, and then it will be subject to approval by Cabinet next week. So presented to you tonight for any comments or feedback. And I will take any questions or comments that help you to do that.
Are there any questions for Ian? Councillor Hone.
Yeah, you were expecting less, would you? I'm looking at table 6, if I can, please, and there the balance not covered by SFC contribution. Therefore, are we saying here that North Herts Council incurred £723,000 of extra expense as a result of COVID, which is not recovered from any funding from central government?
So if you add the 723 in that table and the 765 in 8.16, which is the SLL amount which isn't covered in that table, that takes you to sort of nigh on almost £1.5 million of additional cost and lost income that wasn't specifically covered by the sales fees and charges compensation. I will note out, to be fair to government, we did get a government grant of £558,000, which is detailed in table 7, that offsets some of that. But overall, we are still looking at a significant amount that the council had to fund from its own reserves in relation to COVID-19.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Hone? Yeah, thank you, Ian. Are there any other questions for Ian from the committee? Nothing's coming up. Okay, this report is for noting and comment before it is considered by the Cabinet. Are members satisfied to note this report? There's no vote. Anybody in disconsent? Yeah, okay, everybody's happy. Thank you. Right, that moves us on to item 11, the investment strategy, capital and treasury, end of year review 2021-22. And I'll call upon Ian to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the capital budget and also our treasury strategy. So capital, as I've said, is spend on assets, so things that have got to do for life more than 1 year. And treasury is the fact that we always have cash made up of things like our reserve balances and our general fund reserve. And we invest that cash prudently to generate some income out of it. So we have a strategy to achieve that, to make sure we are appropriately investing that money, prioritising the security of the cash we're investing, and the liquidity, i.e. the availability of that cash, and then after we consider those two, considering the return or the yield we get from that investment. So to summarise the report, you'll see that our total capital spend during the year ended was significantly lower than the budget at the start of the year, and ended at 1.434 million. You'll note from table 1 in the report that at one point we're forecasting spend over £16 million of capital during the year. It's not quite as bad as it sounds in terms of not spending money. Quite a big allocation of that money, of the 16 million, was in relation to the potential, and I'll put it as loosely as that, the potential for some sort of commercial investments in relation to property acquisition, which is £8 million, and the potential for housing investment of £3 million. So that was a big proportion of that total of capital spend, and it was never certain that money would be spent. It was allocated in the capital programme, and it's been taken out during the year, and it's been transpired that actually at the moment there are no investments out there that generate return that we want from any investment we make, and more importantly are compliant with the continually changing rules from CIPFA, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, who set the rules for how we use our money, and those rules have tightened during the year in relation to how we can invest in sort of those more commercial aspects of what we might want to do with our capital programme. So that the conclusion is we expect £1.434 million at the end of the year on capital schemes, and the tables starting in the pack on page 209 detail the monies that have in the last quarter that have slipped, i.e. were due to be spent in the last quarter, but will now be spent in the early part of next financial year, i.e. 2022-23. So that's the table there, and that comes to £979,000. I will point out the paragraph 8.6, which shows that we have still completed a number of capital schemes during the year, and those are listed in those bullet points there. If I then move you on to table 3, which is on page 212 of the pack, that shows we fund our capital programme. As is currently the case, we are still funding most of our capital programme from usable capital receipts and set aside receipts. So this is where we have in the past sold our capital assets, so surplus land and buildings, and under the requirements for local government accounting, where we do that, we have to set that money aside to be used for future capital expenditure, and we are slowly working our way through that money and also generating new money, as detailed in that table. We've generated 2.7 million of new capital receipts during the year. That's from the sale of surplus land. And we use that money to fund our capital programme. In the next few years, we will run out of capital money from that source, and we'll have to start borrowing money to fund our capital programme. That is the position that most other local authorities are in. They can borrow to fund their capital expenditure, and that is allowed by accounting regulations and by local government regulations. We can borrow to fund capital expenditure, but we can't borrow to fund our revenue expenditure. So that concludes the bit up to paragraph 8.9, which is focused on the capital programme. The rest of the report is then focused on our Treasury management position. I have to highlight again in paragraph 8.10, even though I've highlighted it before, because this is a review of the entire year. There was one breach of the Treasury strategy during the year, and that was due to an IT failure. And because we expected the IT to come back during the day, we didn't invoke kind of arrangements to try and come into the office and start using paper records to do a Treasury deal. So it did mean that we had too much money in the current account overnight for one night. So a breach, but one that had no consequences, but still reporting to you. In terms of performance during the year, it was a year of very low interest rates. So in 8.11 there. During the year, new deals are generating about 0.15 of interest rate, sometimes even lower than that. And at the end of the year, the average interest was about 0.33%. You'll probably be aware since then from wider knowledge that interest rates have been going up quite quickly, and now the council is generating in excess of 1% on its investments, which shows how quickly interest rates have moved just in the period since March. Obviously, that's, I suppose, good news in terms of our funding, but still bad news in the respect that's still vastly below the level of inflation, and therefore means that we are, by holding money, still losing money. But that's just the way it is at the moment. And then the paragraphs from 8.313 onwards through to 8.18 detail, as I sort of mentioned earlier, about how we prioritise our investments. And then you've got attached to the report, you've got appendix B, which is the sort of more detailed look at Treasury management. And that includes things like the detail of all the investors we've got at year end, where they're invested, how we've met the prudential indicators and Treasury indicators during the year. Happy to answer any questions either on the report or the appendices, but I'll stop there because if I go on any longer, we're going into too much detail.
Thank you, Ian. Do we have any questions for Ian from the committee? No, we don't. We don't. Okay. In that case, all we need to do is note and comment before it is considered by the Cabinet. Are members satisfied to note this report? Just a nod to do. Thank you. We don't need to vote on it. Thank you, Ian, for that. That moves on to item 11. Hang on. Item 12, I mean. The Finance, Audit and Risk Annual Report 2021-22. And can we call upon Ian again to present, please?
Yeah, last item, so you don't have to give me too much more time tonight. This is a report that we present to full council, and it describes the role of the committee during the year. The idea of it being to provide council with reassurance that this committee is effective and the role it's undertaking during the year. So I'll just take you through the appendix, because the report just basically refers you straight to the appendix anyway. So if I start off on page 242 of the pack. So there's a paragraph there about the effectiveness of audit committees, and that describes that during 2021, SIAS supported us a review of the committee and had a number of findings as a result of that. In relation to the independent member, which is the first bullet point of that list, I had hoped they'd be with us tonight, but it took a bit longer than I was anticipating for them to get approval from their employer to undertake the role. That is on the basis they work for an audit firm, and therefore we need to just get fully signed up that there was no conflict of interest between working for an audit firm and being on this committee. They do not work anywhere close to audit a local government, but needed to make sure that was all okay. We've now had that confirmation. So at the July council meeting, I will be seeking formal approval that that person can undertake this role, and therefore they can join us from September and hopefully provide an additional level of views and insights into the things that are presented to you and help you in your scrutinising role to scrutinise both me and the reports that are provided to you. Also on that list, we've got a forward work plan, and as you'll see later in the document, I provided a summary of the year that's coming up, and I'll take you through that in a bit more detail in a minute, just to sort of, particularly for new members of the committee, to let you know what's happening and what you've got to come, or the excitement and the interesting things that you've got to look at during the year. In relation to learning and development, a key thing, we did sort of fall off a bit during the COVID-19 pandemic when training became a bit more difficult, but it's definitely on my list of things to prioritise for this coming year. So hopefully some of you have been able to attend some of the sessions I did earlier this month, over the last few weeks, in relation to a general session on council finance training. If you didn't get a chance to come along to sessions, we did record one of them, so it'll be made available on GrowZone, and also possible maybe to email it out to you as well. The link to that, and also the slides will be coming out as well. I'm also planning a fraud awareness session. So Nick Jennings, who you will meet in the September meeting, is the manager of the shared anti-fraud service, and anti-fraud is a really interesting subject, and Nick and Darren and other members of the team have talked really well about it and provide a really engaging session for you. So I'm planning to do that with you, and then I'll also look at other training sessions as needs to go along. In previous years, some of you will be aware I've done a training self-assessment matrix. Given that generally has taken quite a long while to get the results back from, and has then given me no time to actually plan the training off the back of it, I'm not planning on doing that this year, and I'm going to guide you for the training I think you need. But albeit, if you do have any subject areas you do want to cover, so please just email me or let me know in one of these meetings that there's a particular area you really want to know more about, and I'm sure we can arrange it. What I want to ask you tonight is around how you would prefer to access training. So some subjects will be much better done either face-to-face or online learning, so where you're sat there and are able to engage fully with the training. There will be some subjects where we can do them through sort of e-learning, written learning, and so those quizzes and sort of where you click on sort of a slideshow. So we have a combination of those. But in respect of those sort of face-to-face or virtual learning, where you do have to sort of attend at a certain time, I would ask you to let me know what your preference would be on those, in terms of, we've got sort of three options. I think there's during the day, but I appreciate some will be working during the day, so it might not be a feasible option for you. There is evening, and that can either be on a completely different evening to one of these meetings, or we can look at doing a training session before one of these meetings, so starting at say 6:30 and then doing an hour of training before we have one of these meetings. So I would welcome views on that, because that would help me plan all that training, which will help you to get the best out of being part of this committee. So I'll leave that hanging, but I will come back to that for comments and your answers later on. And then I said that I would then sort of describe to you what happened and what's going to happen. So looking at page 244 and 245, the table there sets out all the reports that were considered during the year by the committee during last year. And then there's a main achievement section, which talks about some of the more detailed stuff, some of the non-regular reports that were considered, which includes the changes around the council delivery plan and how we're going to manage risk, which I alluded to earlier. There's also a review of contract procurement rules, the fraud policy and financial regulations, and then also detailed right in that last sentence there, look at the tax compliance framework we've adopted for the council. So in terms of what's coming up, so I cover, there's lots of regular reports, lots of them are quarterly. So we're in June now. So if you look at page 245, the first bit there are all reports that you are receiving tonight. So that look back at what happened during 21-22 in terms of both FAR, risk management, revenue budget, and the capital budget, and also SIAS look back to last year. So those look back reports. And as we move into September, we then get the first look at the current year, as in 22-23. So we've got the quarter 1 position in terms of both SIAS, how the internal audit plan's going, and also the revenue budget and the capital and treasury strategy. At the same time, we've also got the shared anti-fraud service will come and look back at 21-22, as well as providing an update about where they are in the work in 22-23 as well. And then we should also start looking forward to the future as well. So the medium-term financial strategy is where we set out what we feel funding will look like over the next few years and the implications of that. That comes to this committee in September and then goes through to Cabinet and Council for adoption. And that goes alongside any updates to the council plan on the basis that money and what the council plans to do need to talk to each other. They need to be linked documents and reflect on that together. As we move into December, we then look at the quarter 2 position and the more detailed work on the budget moving forward into 2023-24 at that point. Before in January, the budget for 23-24 goes through this committee, then to Cabinet, and then to full council in February. And then in March, we're looking at the quarter 3 position, all those reports I mentioned previously. What is uncertain at the moment is the timing of the approval of the statement of accounts. So the accounts you approved tonight, in a normal year pre-COVID, would have been approved, as I said, about a year ago at the end of July 2021 for the 2020-2021 year. There will be a delay again this year. Current indications are that from Ernst & Young is they'll be doing our audit of our accounts for 21-22, or the year that's just ended in the end of March. They were doing that audit in November, after the statutory deadline, and therefore they won't complete the work until, in all likelihood, December, possibly January. So I'm expecting they'll be approving the accounts in January next year with a fair wind, and that will be when we'll be doing it. As I said sort of earlier, that reflects the state of resourcing in the audit market, and it's a situation that almost all councils are facing. As mentioned towards the end of the report, always happy for you as a committee to guide me on reports you'd like to see. Obviously, you've got to bear in mind there's also the Overview Scrutiny Committee, and we can't step on their toes, but there are areas, if you want to look at them, that we can consider how we address them between this committee or Overview and Scrutiny, and sort of happy to any suggestions in that respect, particularly when they do have a more financial perspective to them. So yeah, that's the report. Hope that's given you insight to what happened last year and what's coming up this year. So what I'm asking you to do in the recommendations is to approve that this is referred on to full council. So hopefully they can also see the work that's been done by this committee in the previous year. Has there ever had to take any questions, committee?
Thank you, Ian. Have we any questions on this? Councillor Billing.
I'd just like to ask whether we could look at how the council resilience against cost of living inflation refreshers, if we can look at that as part of the forward plan.
Yes, I completely agree. We should do that. And as part of the medium-term financial strategy, I fully intend on doing that. Because I think we very need to carefully look at inflation, both in terms of the costs the council faces, but also the income the council collects. We do collect significant amounts of money from our sales fees and charges, and that's usually pegged to CPI as an increased rate. And obviously with the rate that's currently sitting at, we need to review whether that's still a sensible assumption, or whether that needs to come down, balancing our residents' ability to pay against obviously the financial pressure that then puts on the council. So yeah, that will be covered in that medium-term financial strategy and ongoing throughout the year, I'd expect, because it's such a live issue, such an important one.
Great. I think Ian's actually highlighted three things, which were our reports that we wanted to be included in or see. Second was the training, what type of training we would like, whether it be in face or online, or whether it, I rather like the idea of having an hour before the meeting myself, but that's my view. And then of course the most important thing is that we agreed that this annual report can be referred to the council, and I just need you to nod if you agreed that we can take this to the council. We can take that one offline. Is there any other comments? Because Claire's talked about a report that she'd like to see. Is there any other reports that do we think we need to be included on Councillor Hone?
Thank you. Certainly, we mentioned the Council of Financial Regulations. Perhaps that's something which could come to us, an update on that in the not too distant future.
Ian?
Yes, have to do that. Yeah, we try and review it every year, and I think probably is due a slightly more major review this year. So yes, I'll bring that to you later in the year.
Thank you. I share your sentiments, Chairman, that I think an hour before suits me best. At 6:30 start for any training that may be necessary. But
does anyone else have any view? Do you like that idea, or is it not impossible for some of you?
I would struggle to make it for 6:30.
Okay, Councillor Whedon.
Yeah, I'd prefer it on a separate night if possible.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Whedon, was that?
I was just saying I'd prefer it, as a separate session.
Separate session.
Yeah.
Any other views? Is there, so that sort of rules out the if we need all to be there, don't we? Really, if we do it early. So, other suggestions? I know it's online. I prefer an interaction with somebody like Ian. Ian, obviously you're listening to this. We were saying that we can't do the hour before, although that would have been quite nice, but not all of us can make it because of other commitments. So arranging a session. So I know you mentioned that we could do it during the day, but that's not available to a lot of people either. So I'll just make sure, can we rule out during the day because of our work commitments? Yeah, sure. So that's another session. I think you mentioned on another evening before or after, well, before would be good, before a FAR meeting. Views, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'm not expecting, whilst it'd be lovely to be able to arrange a date when everyone can make it, I do appreciate that won't be possible all the time. So I'm happy to sort of do a combination of an hour before FAR meetings and also look at other evenings. Particularly as there'll be sessions we're doing where there'll be wider interest as well. So we're doing fraud training. I will open that up to all councillors, so not just members of this committee. So on that basis, I might be able to do that across two sessions. So one before a FAR meeting and then one on a separate night. And that would then hopefully get both camps. So yeah, I'm happy to look into that and I'll start to arrange training on that basis. But yeah, avoiding during the day, which is what I expected, but just I put the option out there.
Fair enough. So you're saying that both of these sessions before, if several of us can make it an hour before, of course, but the second session on another evening would be exactly the same training.
Yeah, we do the same session twice. Yeah.
Is that agreed? Do we can? Everybody happy with that? Yeah.
Comment.
Yeah, of course.
If we're going to show up, can we expect Mr. Cooper is sharp as well.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Yes.
My plan is to come to meetings. Yes, just I couldn't this evening due to various things going on. But certainly for the next meeting, I will definitely be there. We really want to welcome our new independent member. We start the next meeting, but yes, I will start to come on to meetings.
Thank you.
Ian did ask for a special dispensation not being here this evening. I believe to his daughter's birthday.
That's I think in these certain circumstances, if we're doing training, it's for me advantageous to have Ian here because we can fire questions back to us rather than keep going.
Yeah, sorry, I was just thought you might have wanted to know why he's not here, Steve.
No, that's his decision, not mine.
Councillor Albert.
Only just to add, in doing those invites, can we make sure, and I'm sure Ian will anyway, invite people who are substitutes for the committee, because that's obviously equally sometimes gets forgotten about, but actually that is quite why maybe having some different options, because there may be another half a dozen people who are not here this evening, but we're really keen for them to come to the training because they're the subs on the committee that we don't know what their views are, but giving them a couple of different options for training would probably fit the purpose.
Very good point, Councillor Albert. Yes, we do need to include our substitutes in this. And Ian, can you just confirm that you will include our substitutes?
Yes, as I said, I'm keen that anyone who's interested in any training I put on to attend. So the attendees will definitely be this committee, substitutes, and anyone who have a councillor who's interested will be invited along, because actually Cabinet will also benefit from some of the training as well as just the wider council audience as well.
Thank you. And in that case, it leaves me to thank everybody for attendance and thank you for all our presenters this evening. And I'm going to draw this meeting to a close at 20:56. Thank you.